Okay. It's 10 o'clock. We always pride ourselves in starting on time. Welcome, everybody. This meeting is open to the public, either in person or you can dial into this meeting anytime we have a county board meeting. So we will, with that, we'll call the meeting to order and we'll rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome to the East Central students and staff that's along with them. We're happy to have you here. It's not often that we get this room full during a board meeting. The unfortunate part of publicly open meetings is we don't get a lot of public a lot of times to come to our meetings. And it baffles me sometimes. But with that, we will move on to public forum. After being recognized by the chair, each speaker will state his name or her name and limit the comments to 3 minutes. So do we have anybody for public forum?
I had a couple of students who wanted to. Gage is ready. No, remember, we embedded it in our First Amendment. One of the 5 rights guaranteed is the right to petition the government for redress. You know, being used, and I talked to many students, they know a lot of these. I mean, students were like, hey, that's my neighbor, that's my dad's best friend. We know these people. These are our neighbors. They're here to serve us. They do hard work that's often thankless. And we're going to be respectful and just tell them some of the things that make a difference to us that they might be able to help with. So I have 3 students who agreed to tell a little bit, to say something. We'll play paper, scissors, rock if we need to. We didn't do it. Come on up and just tell them your story about culture.
Yeah, right there, right behind the podium.
Okay.
There you go.
If you talk in the mic, they can hear you online
Yeah.
too.
All right, there we go. Thanks for coming up.
Okay.
Name?
I would like to talk. Oh, my name is Gage Vork. I would like to talk about the Wi-Fi where I live. I live on Duxbury Road, and I live in kind of like a dead spot, kind of. So we can't really get anything for Wi-Fi, and that makes it hard for schooling. Like distance last year, I couldn't really do anything. And it's hard for me to do my homework at home without that access. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Thank you so much, because you know what? Those are the stories that we can tell to people who can make a difference to get you Wi-Fi, because I can talk till I'm blue in the face. And when we hear it from a student, it makes a difference. So thank you very much for having the courage to come here and talk to us.
You know, I'd like to add to that. We have a survey that's out there right now to help with broadband and to help us so that we know how we can help you. I think it would be awesome if some of you students would take that survey, and Mr. Laurie can help you with that. Especially when you don't have internet at home, you can do it at the school.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
So do you have to drive to a friend's house to get connected, or how far do you have to move?
Well, normally I would just go to my friend's house to do things, or I would stay after school to do homework.
Okay.
Tell him that your grandpa is involved in the economic development too, and you mentioned that to me.
Oh yeah, my grandpa, I forgot what he was a part of, but he was part of one of the teams that decides like to build businesses and where they should be. He's part of it for Hinckley, and I think it's Bruno.
Okay,
Part of two of them, I think.
Wonderful.
thank you.
Economic development. Does that sound
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Who's your grandfather?
His name is Ronald Osmus.
Oh, yeah.
Nice. Good, good. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I'm Summer and I want to talk about the internet issues. So I moved up here from down in like Scott County, and we had pretty good internet down there. It's by the cities. And my mom does like an online job. So it's like on the computer, it's customer service. And when we moved up here, the Wi-Fi wasn't good enough for like all our phones and her work. So she had to quit her job because we didn't have good enough Wi-Fi. That's it.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Elsie Lowerson, and I just wanted to thank you for all your work, and I know it's hard. So I just want to talk about public transportation, a passenger train from Minneapolis to Duluth. I know there's a freight train now, but it'd be very good for economic development. And from the history, from what we just heard, is that Pine County started with transportation. It was a really big thing. So getting back to that would be really helpful for people who don't have like driver's license, just easier to get around. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Jeff?
Chair, members of the board. I was asked to provide an update on or information on the current missing or the most recent missing person case that we have is Ashley Carlson. As you might know, she was reported missing over a month ago now on the 24th of September. And so we have focused our search in the area where a car that was associated with her was located out in the St. Croix Forest, Wilma Township. And we have spent, we haven't counted the hours, but man hours wise, we've got thousands of hours in the search that's out there. We've been out there on foot. We've had aircraft support. We've been out on one of the lakes of interest out there. And I want to name a few of the entities that have helped us search. It's Mille Lacs Tribal PD, Burnett County Sheriff's Office, Minnesota DNR through their forestry, conservation officers, and their air support, like I mentioned. St. Louis County Search and Rescue, Minnesota BCA, Sawyer County, Wisconsin Canines, St. Paul Fire, Minnesota State Patrol, Wisconsin DNR, Wisconsin DCI, North Star Search and Rescue, both with ground search and canine emergency response team, CAM Search and Rescue, and Pine County CERT team, and the East Central Drug Task Force. So we have called in a lot of resources. And one thing is also, we don't necessarily even have to make those calls. There's people that are calling and offering help too. So, and I've probably forgotten some of the entities that are involved in that because it is a big operation out there. And just to keep you guys updated, we're still getting some possible sightings that we're tracking down. We're also starting to get back some of the data that is gathered through cell phones and other means, and processing that to see if that points us in some other directions. And working really closely with Burnett. She lived in Burnett. The last possible sighting that we have of her would be in Pine County. So it's kind of a mutual between us and them with, again, all those resources that are coming in to help. We did have just this past weekend The CAM group that I mentioned, they're a volunteer group that works throughout the state. They came up Friday and Saturday and spent all day out there with 14 people, I was told. So again, we've got a lot of people that have put in a lot of time out there, and that's not counting the again, probably thousands of hours that the investigators have been putting in for the last month. I would say, half their time is devoted to that case alone, with the other half trying to keep up with normal stuff that's going on in the county. So we're continuing to ask if people know anything to call us, let us know. We'll look into a sighting if it's in Canada or Mexico. So we'll follow up all those that we can. And of course, if anyone has any firsthand information on where she might have been, we're not giving up on the fact that she might be alive somewhere else, but we are, again, as time goes on, it's more concerning. So
How old?
33.
Hunting season's coming. That might help too.
Might get some additional resources out there unknowingly, yes. Any other questions or?
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks for updating.
Thanks.
Do that.
Anybody else for public forum?
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
I just want to make a couple comments.
okay.
I just want to thank the board for tolerating my absence and virtual, and I know it was a pain and extra roll call votes and all that, and I appreciate it. So, thank you.
It's good having you back.
Anybody else? Yes.
Leslie Sauter, your economic development coordinator. I heard the broadband comments. I came running down the hallway with some invites. We are having two meetings, Mondays, November 15th and Monday, November 22nd. They're at 10:30, so they're during your school day, but there is a pre-registration survey that you can fill out even if you can't attend, and tell us your story in that survey. So I'm going to pass these around. There should be enough for everybody. If not, I can print more. But also to the board, please spread the word. It's on our website. Even if you can't attend, fill out the survey. We're doing it over Zoom. So if you can hop on your phone, wherever you are, it should work because it's over Zoom. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Leslie. Anybody else? Thanks, everybody that participated. Move on to the agenda.
Mr. Chair, there's an addition, or excuse me, a correction first to consent agenda item number 4A, the promotion of Terry Clemenson. It actually is an increase in grade and pay. So he will go from a grade 12 to a grade 13 at $41.66 per hour. And then two additions. The first is agenda item 4B, highway maintenance supervisor promotion for Chris Matrius. And regular agenda item number 5A, appointment of Mike Gaynor to the Development Authority Study Committee.
Commissioner Ludwig will move as amended.
Lovegren will second.
Got a motion by Ludwig, second by Lovegren. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Looking for approval of the minutes from the October 19th, 21 County Board meeting and summary for publication.
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes.
I'll second.
Motion by Lovegren, seconded by Moore. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes of the boards, reports and correspondence, Pine County Chemical Health Coalition minutes and the Pine County Land Surveyors report from October 2021.
I'll move that.
I'll second it.
Motion by Moore, second by Lovegren to approve the reports. Any discussion? If not, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Move on to the consent agenda.
I'll make a motion to accept the consent agenda.
Second, Ludwig.
Motion by Lovegren, second by Ludwig. Any discussion? If not, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We'll move on to the regular agenda. We're looking for a letter of support to East Central Energy for a broadband. There's a letter of support to East Central Energy to authorize the county board to sign. If Terry was at a meeting with myself and Leslie and David, you want to say anything, Terry?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
exciting. It's going to cover a huge part of Pine County. Unfortunately, it's not going to cover areas like Arna Township and some areas down there, or up north in Carrick will not be covered. They're in different electric plants or Minnesota Power, so the cities, but East Central Energy covers a lot of Minnesota. And we're hoping that the board will take upon them to continue to go forward and do their feasibility study and see if this is something that will work for them to bring broadband to the East Central Energy clients. So they're having their meeting on, wrong meeting here. Yeah, November 19th to determine whether or not they're going to continue moving forward this. So if any families want to send letters of support to East Central Energy, just asking them to continue looking into it to see if it's feasible for them to do this for their clientele. It would be really helpful. The more letters of support that they can get, I think the better chance we're going to have of them moving forward. So with that, I'd like to make a motion that Pine County Board of Commissioners send this support letter to East Central Energy, supporting them to continue moving forward with broadband.
I'll second that.
Okay, I concur with what Terry said. I think it's an exciting time for us, and those of you that get if you know where your electric power comes from, this is East Central. We used to call them East Central Electric or East Central Energy. They had completed a study 2 years ago that said it was possible for them to do it, but it was economically not in something they wanted to bite off. And now the funding sources have changed. And so they're thinking it's an opportunity for them. They're committed to their customers in East Central Minnesota and Western Wisconsin. And so the neat thing about this is it would be one carrier that gets to about, I guess, 85% of the Pine County residents. And maybe, I mean, it's too early to even talk about partnerships with other people, but we're struggling getting carriers to go beyond their ROIs, their return on investments. And we do have some movement right now with carriers building some fiber to the homes, but the next few miles from the end of that fiber is going to be a real struggle. It costs, it's cost prohibitive without some real influx of money from someplace. Yes.
So I'm not on that committee, but John Ongaro at Arrowhead spoke to something about the grants for broadband, and there's a mix up in the paperwork or something, or they're not so 2022. And I don't know if they were state or federal because my connection was lagging, but did you hear anything in your committee about the grant applications and the paperwork won't be ready or anything like that for some of those projects?
No,
Okay.
and the money that East Central would go after is kind of in a different, at least the way I understand it, a different pocket than the money that we traditionally have been, or that places like Midco and SCI have been able to access their funds. Because it, and I did not hear that. I do.
Yeah, and I didn't want to bring it up because I wasn't sure about his comment, but I heard he said nothing was going to happen in 2022. But that might get fixed. Who knows?
Yeah.
But, so I don't know if it was state or federal grants.
Anyway,
Grant thing.
to the students that are sitting out here, these kind of conversations have been going on very rapidly in the last 6 months. And so, we're trying our level best to get internet. Half the board is sitting here with bad internet. So we know the struggle. We want to make it happen as quickly as possible too. But anyway, we do have a motion and a second. Is there any more questions or discussion? Jay?
One more comment on it. It was Gage and Summer. Both of you had the courage to speak up today. I would encourage you to write that letter to, like Terry had mentioned, to East Central, or call their 800 number, reach out to them and let it know. And every little bit will help.
If you go to East Central Energy's website, they list their board members. They're elected just like county board members to serve their constituents. You have a board member from your area, I would encourage you to contact Greg and let him know the struggles you have, so that when he goes to his board meeting, I tell you what, you would be amazed, and your teachers will tell you this, what a phone call or a letter from a student will do to the mind of somebody my age to propel them to do something to make life better. You guys have a lot of power. Use it. Like JJ said, take the time to call or write a letter.
I'd like to add to that, for them to hear that your mom had to quit her job because she didn't have internet service and she couldn't do it, that's a hardship for your family. They need to know those stories. And if you could even write a letter to us about that, that would be awesome to put into our files, because we're going to be working with other providers also. And we need to be able to share these stories with them to let them know that we have a lot of unserved and underserved people in our county. We really need their help.
With that, no more questions. We'll call for the vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. 2022 budget update.
Kelly.
Oh,
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I'm Kelly Schroeder, County Auditor Treasurer. And I am going to just give you a quick update about where we are in the 2022 budget as of now. So just a reminder, when we build these budgets, we're working with our crystal balls, as good as they are. And so there's some big players within our budget that we're really relying on that make or break the budget. So the first one is the county program aid and just other state aids that we receive. Those things make up a huge portion of our budget. And so we've seen this happen before, should the state come have a hard time, we may not get that funding. So right now we built our budget based on assuming that we will get that funding. Additionally, we have a lot of revenues outside of property taxes, in contracts, in reimbursements for services. That's a lot of health and human services, and then our payment in lieu of tax. So those are things that we are working on the assumption are going to continue on and at their projected levels. And then lastly, the big expense in the budget, and I've got a few slides on it, is obviously our personnel costs. That is the biggest portion of our budget. And so we built that expense based on a 2% cost of living increase, and then the people getting their annual steps as scheduled, and then with a 6% health insurance increase. And so as we've stepped through since the last time we looked at it, I think that we're still feeling pretty good about that health insurance number, where that's going to be. So that's good news, because in previous years, we've gotten a surprise as we've gotten further on into the fall that whatever number we thought it was isn't going to work. So right now it's still looking good. So an overview of just the budget as a total on the revenue side. So our 2021 revenue was about $46.5 million. Our 2022 revenue is projected at just over $50 million. That does include that property tax increase that you approved in September. But overall, that's an increase of $3.7 million, which about $3 million of that then is not property tax increase.
Mr. Chair, I think Ryan's trying to get the screen to show fully, but can you just explain what the
Right.
numbers are on the bottom?
Yes, so on the bottom, the graph that you can't quite see is by fund. So the first two bar graphs or bars on the graph are the general fund, just showing 2021 revenue where it was to 2022 revenue. The next graph or the next two bars are the Health and Human Services Fund, and so that shows a very level revenue. And then the far right is our highway fund, and that shows a big tick up in revenue, which again, that has to do with those project dollars coming in from the state.
How much of that increase was levy, Kelly?
It's just over,
Was
it's
700 something.
700 something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in talking about revenues in the general fund, I just have a list of the top 10 revenues that bring funds into the county besides property taxes that help fund our services in the general fund. So you can run down the list. As we talked at the preliminary time, we had some big things that used to be in this list that aren't anymore. So rental income, we used to have rental income from the city of Pine City and some more rental income from Health and Human Services, but because Health and Human Services is in a smaller space now, their rents have gone down. So that's a revenue that we used to have that now in 2021 we no longer have. And then also previously prisoner boarding fees and interest was in this list. And those are things that unfortunately with the way that things have gone, that revenue isn't available to us anymore. So they are out of this list. So when you remove revenues, that means that you've still got those expenses that have to be paid by some other means. Moving on to expenses. So just overall in the budget, expenses, $46.7 million in 2021, 2022, about $50.6 million. So that's an increase of almost $3.9 million in expense increase. And so a lot of that is salaries. And as we'll kind of walk through the graph too, that'll help show it as well. General fund 2021 expenses to 2022 expenses, literally that entire increase is salaries between the two. In HHS, you can see they're very level. She has a very large increase in salaries, but luckily she's got some other areas in her budget that she can move things around. And highway, again, their expenses showed like they jumped way up for 2022, but again, that's those projects that there is large projects planned, and so that there'll be larger expenses. So our top non-debt expenses. So this breaks down that salary number of between 2021 and 2022. There's over $1 million of salary and benefit increases just within the budget. Our road and bridge construction, and as I noted earlier too, salaries and benefits. I mean, that's a huge portion of our budget. If we go back to that expenses at $50 million for 2022, and you look at the 2022 salaries, that's literally half is salaries. And so that's just a huge driver of our expenses is our people. Road and bridge construction, one of our next biggest expense, out of home placements. And then major equipment purchases, our medical services in the jail, and then the library are the other top non-debt expenses that we've got when you look at it as a county-wide budget. So when we look at the entire budget, we take all of those revenues and we showing them against all of those expenses. We still have a deficit of just under $300,000. So it's technically an unbalanced budget. And so when that happens, that gap, in previous years, we'd talk about that gap being paid by fund balance. our savings account, which is not something that we have wanted to do because it's been our goal to build those fund balances. But this year we have that wonderful thing of ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act. So some of that gap for 2022, about half of that we are able to fill with ARPA funds. And so there's things within the budget that will be paid with those ARPA dollars instead of with levy dollars. And then we do have a planned use of reserves that really is money from 2021 that we're not spending, that we're rolling over, but it rolls over into the fund balance. When you look at the revenues and expenditures compared, so you can see the general fund has a little bit of a difference between that revenue and expenses. So again, that shows that we don't have enough revenues to cover our expenses. And all of that is covered by either ARPA or the reserves. HHS is very balanced, and same with road and bridge. They come out pretty much even. But again, these things do include the levy increases that you approved. So had you not approved those levy increases, those revenue bars would be lower, at least in the cases of the general fund and road and bridge. So items to highlight. So when I did really the same presentation back in the middle of August, the budget included all of these things that we wanted. And so this walks through some of those things that were cut out of that preliminary budget, or were just big game changers in our budget. So originally there was proposals to add a lieutenant position in the sheriff's office and to increase our ag educator to a full-time position. And so when we are where we are today, the budget does not include either of those two things. It does use reserves, as I just mentioned, that $138,000. We're using reserves because we have that rent income loss. And rather than taking that whole $44,000 of rent income loss, we're gonna fill some of 22,000, half of it with fund balance. And then we have some salary savings, mainly in veteran services and in court security from 2021 that we're gonna roll into the 2022 budget. So we also shifted expenses to ARPA, as I mentioned. The proposed budget does include a $75,000 increase to fleet maintenance. Mark had requested $100,000 and that got cut to $75,000. So that's just something to keep in mind as we continue working through. We've added a lot of vehicles, but not added any money to actually maintain those vehicles. It does include a $100,000 increase to the fleet purchases. So to be able to purchase more vehicles, but then you've got the maintenance side. It's a double-edged sword. It includes additional IT funding. So as we've talked over the years, we were able to shift a lot of funding out of IT over to restricted funds like the Recorder Compliance Fund. However, that fund no longer has a balance that we can use for that. So we had to shift it back to IT. So that's a big ticket of $146,000 that had to go back to IT. Within this budget, we're still funding our building fund and our technology fund. So those are those set aside funds for those specific things. And so that was something that was set up a handful of years ago to actually give us a chance to address some of these things before they become an emergency. So it does continue to fund those. It keeps our stable funding for our partner organizations. I note that there was a library increase of $14,400. The other partner organization that had a small increase was the SWCD, was about $5,000. And so within this budget as well, unfortunately, there's a huge reduction in our prisoner boarding revenues. So that's been a nice revenue to help offset the cost of running the jail. A lot of those revenues came from the state of Minnesota, and they just frankly aren't boarding people out anymore. So that's $65,000 of jail expenses that now we need to pay for a different way. I've talked quite a bit about the rental revenues that are decreased, so that's 44,000. And then another thing that was within the preliminary, the very, very preliminary budget that was cut is the sheriff had asked for an additional $30,000 in overtime. And we did not have that in the budget. We know that's probably going to happen just because of how leaves work and how scheduling works and things. So right now that's really an unbudgeted expense that we likely know is going to happen. This slide is a little bit busy, but it's just an overview. It shows by department, and this is only the departments that have staff. It shows by department how much new levy dollars the departments needed within the 2022 budget. And then I also, the second column, the salary / benefits, shows how much the salaries and benefits went up for that department. So for example, right at the top, we've got IT. We've already talked about, they have $146,000 of new levy dollars they need. 21,000 of that is because of salary and benefit increases that really, without cutting a person, there's nothing that Ryan can do about that. You know, you can kind of run down the line. When you get down to the bottom, you know, I just am amazed at that very last one with Becky, with her $80,000 less in levy dollars, and her salary still went up almost $400,000, and she's making it work. So it's just to kind of show you that, you know, those levy dollars, most of it is going to salaries. One thing that I did want to point out, court security. Yesterday, Rod and I had a discussion because we realized that our main full-time court security person had resigned, and we were still budgeting for him at the top of the pay scale. And so then we realized that really the new person will be coming on at the bottom of the pay scale. So we found about $13,000 of savings there yesterday. So that was, you've got $13,000 more to spend, or you can just levy $13,000 less. So debt, and so the county has 3 bonds that we owe. Overall, our payments are just over $2 million a year. The way that those debt is structured, our payments stay very level through the life of them. I'm really looking forward to 2031 when those big ones are done. And just a reminder, like that 2020 courthouse that we just refunded or refinanced last fall because interest rates were so low. Ellers, our consultant, has said that in the 2015 jail bonds, they can be refunded in 2023. And so if interest rates are still kind of how they are, we're probably going to be going through that. And so then we could potentially have some savings there. This is just a breakdown of where our 2022 levy dollars ended up. So 2021, our levy was just under $20 million. 2022, the preliminary levy that you guys set at a 3.6% increase is at 20.6 million. And then my chart there breaks it down of where those levy dollars went. And so really that change by fund shows you who got more and who got less. So overall, that's where we're sitting right now on the 2022 budget. You will need to, and levy, you will need to finalize it by the end of December. We always like to do it at the second board meeting in December. So between now and then, obviously I'm continuing to always review revenues and expenses and see what we can find, see what rocks we can turn over. But if it's something that you guys are wanting to review further yourselves, you know, that's something that we definitely can bring up. In the expenses, you know, I'm always looking at those increased line items of, you know, what was it last year and what is it this year and why did it increase? And really, when I look at those things, those line items that increased are personnel. So it's not just that Department X in their office supplies went from 10,000 to 20,000. Like there's not really much of that. So it's hard to find find dollars in those expenses to cut. I think we're all always thinking about what things could we shift to ARPA funding. And so as people think and get ideas, it's always something great to bring up. I know department heads, we're always trying to think of what do we have in our budget that we could get rid of and move to ARPA. But we've moved a lot of rocks and not found a lot, but because we want to make sure that we're spending that money according to how it has to be spent. The other thing that I always like to note is we have a lot of restricted fund balances. So essentially those are savings accounts that are for specific purposes and they can only be used for those specific purposes. And so sometimes there's expenses that we have in our regular budget that really we could shift and use some of these savings account dollars. So I always like to have that list up there because it's definitely something to think about of what could we pay for out of these fund balances. You see that big dollar amount in the recorder compliance fund at $330,000. Really, that's all spoken for with buying the new property tax and CAMA system. And so that number really is almost like it's zero. But it's just, I mean, it's what the fund balance was as of December 31st, 2020. Like the recorder tech fund also has a nice balance. That money is very restricted, what we can spend it on, literally technology for the recorder's office. And it gets tough because we have 3 people in the recorder's office. How much technology do they need? But Ryan and I also try to think a little bit creatively with those funds to see how we can move any expenses that he has that support the recorder's office. So overall, that's where we're at today. Questions?
Josh.
So you did find 13,000 savings? That's.
I've got $13,000. So do you want to cut it from the levy or do you want to spend it on something else?
Well, that's better than a increase.
Yeah.
That's all I gotta say.
I think the prudent thing to do is to wait for another 6 weeks and see if some other expense pops up, but it appears to me we're pretty much where we thought we would be. We haven't found any terrible surprises.
Not yet.
And Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
We are using about $138,000 of reserves. So if there is excess revenue over expenditures like that 13,000, the first impact is it would reduce the amount of reserves that we're spending.
Right. Thanks, Kelly.
Huh?
Pretty exciting stuff, huh?
If you like numbers.
And just one more comment. So this is the budget then that we will start to use to prepare for the Truth and Taxation meeting, which will be in that first week of December.
So.
Oh, Tony, go ahead.
Thanks for coming. Good.
Get going.
I think it worked out.
They were very well behaved. For ninth graders, I'm impressed.
Take care.
Looks different with the Populous.
You lost your audience.
That was really hard to read back there. So could you email that
Yeah.
out?
Yeah, we can email it out.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Anything else on budget?
No, I thanks very much for the,
Thanks, Kelly.
With that 13,000, just thinking, we talked about the fleet maintenance and the need there, we're probably gonna have a need there, and the sheriff's overtime or two, so.
well, I think my first inclination is
Keep it.
it's the spending of reserves.
Yeah.
I mean, but we can mull this over for a while.
Yeah.
We probably all have an idea.
Well, we haven't added to our reserves really. Last year we didn't either, so I would say we got to keep reserves.
Yeah.
We're not
I think the other
really to our goal yet.
piece of that, Kelly, is to see what we think our carryout's gonna be. Because that really has built our reserves in the last couple of years. We've had underspent portions of our budget that carried over. And so we really built our reserves up, even though we didn't have a reserve budgeted. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, redistricting. My favorite subject. Maybe not.
I don't know, I can go around in circles for many hours on redistricting.
Yeah.
So again, Kelly Schroeder, County Auditor Treasurer. So redistricting, I'm going to just jump to the next slide. So redistricting occurs after each census. And so it literally redraws those boundaries for the different districts. So we think in terms of commissioner districts, but it's happening for congressional districts, for state legislative districts, cities, townships. So the redistricting is much bigger than us, but we focus just on ours a little bit. When we talk in redistricting, the principles that we always have to keep in mind are that districts are supposed to be regular. So I feel like regular really means rectangular as you can make them. Compact, so it should be as compact as it can be. It shouldn't be pulled out one way or the other. And they have to be contiguous. And so contiguous, for example, Brook Park City. It's located right smack dab in the middle of Brook Park Township. Brook Park City can never be in a different commissioner district than Brook Park Township. It just can't happen. We have a few cities like that, like Asco. But then you've got like Hinckley and Pine City that touch several different townships. And so those places get a little bit easier to shift one way or the other.
It used to be split right down Highway 61.
It did, yeah.
All right. So on my very
Still confused about that.
On my very first slide, this just shows how the commissioner districts currently are. The little blue boxes, those are the cities, obviously. They're not labeled on here, but this is how they're currently laid out, which was no change. The 2010, or well, really it was 2012 redistricting did not change these. So this has been in place for quite some time. Who redistricts? So I had sort of already touched on this, but the state's the very first entity that redistricts. They redistrict the congressional districts and their state legislative districts. And so that's something that they are working on currently. They've got a committee that's working on it. And really the other two entities can't start until the state redistricting is done. Because your commissioner districts can't split a state legislative district. So if Windermere Township ends up in a different, Windermere's maybe not a good example. Kettle River Township ends up in a different state legislative district, then it's going to be hard for it to stay in District 4 because District 4 is in a different state legislative district. The one thing that I'm hoping for to happen is for that House district to cover all of Pine County, but we'll see how that ends up. Because we have that little corner that's covered by Sundin right now. Cities, townships, and schools, really, I probably should have had them above the county because they're the next ones in line to redistrict. So some cities, for example, they elect by ward. So we elect council members by where they live. We don't have any of that here in Pine County. Precincts are something that we have one city with multiple precincts. And that's because that's in a separate census block. My hope is, and that's the city of Sturgeon Lake. I have testified to the state and hopefully we can get that city put back as one. So then we would effectively have no cities or townships with multiple precincts. Sometimes cities, bigger cities will split into multiple precincts just for polling place ease and things like that, but really we're not at that point. So then once the cities and townships are done, then the county can pick it up. And our responsibility is commissioner districts. Some counties have the responsibility to redistrict the soil and water, but that's when the soil and water seats are elected by district. So you only vote for the person who's in your district, where we vote on all seats. The person has to live in that district, but we get to vote on all of the seats. So we do not have to redistrict soil and water. So we just focus on commissioner districts. The time frame, so the state's final deadline is February 15th to finish their redistricting. As I've heard, it seems that in previous redistricting, the court ends up making a decision and we all move on. So we can't really start a formal process until we know how the state turns out. But we can do a lot of legwork ahead of time. And so that's what I'm hoping to start today. The cities and townships have till March 29th to do their redistricting. Really, I think that that's going to be pretty quick because we don't have we have one city that has multiple precincts and hopefully that's going to go back to one precinct. And then our deadline is April 26th, 2022, or 80 days after the state, whichever one sooner. And so we have several months on our side, but yet, again, I could spend hours and go around in circles. So schools are on the redistricting list, but really it's just affirming their boundaries. So it's not that they're necessarily like changing their boundaries. So for you guys, for the county commissioners, when is it required? So there's 5 criteria that says commissioner districts have to be redistricted. So we really only have 3 of those criteria that apply to Pine County though. So those are the 3 I'm gonna focus on. So the first one is that the district varies in population more than 10% from the average that a single district does. And we're gonna dig into what each of these mean. A majority of the least populous districts contain less than the majority of the population, or the districts are not as equal in population as possible. And so that last one is a little bit squishy in that it's almost our decision of, are they equal as possible or are they not? So just a list of where we are and how it compares to where we were in 2010 based on the 2020 census. So we've lost 874 people. From the Census Bureau, it's interesting to hear them talk because they are feeling like COVID maybe had some impact on responses. And so it's a little bit hard because when you think about just what was going on the census stage of April 1st, 2020, the world was like, we had no idea. And so that very well could have had an impact because from what I see, we have people flooding into this county. We're not losing people. We have a lot of those people retiring here to their lake houses and a lot of people just wanting to get out of the metro area. So I was a little surprised it went down, but those are the numbers we have to work with. So you can see how the districts changed between 2010 and 2020. So this gets into my calculations of, do we actually need to redistrict based on these crazy criteria? And I say they're crazy just because when you first read them, you're like, what does that mean? So the first criteria is the district varies in population more than 10% from the average. So the first thing we need to do is figure out what our average district population would be. So literally there's 5 of you and we have our population, we divide by 5. So if all was said and done and everything was equal, each of your district would have 5,775 people in them. But again, when you deal with that regular, compact, contiguous, you can't do that. So the first criteria just says, as long as they're within 10% of that number, so 577, you don't need to redistrict under this criteria. So looking at our differences from that perfect average of 5,775, we have no differences that are at that or greater. And so under this criteria, we do not need to redistrict. Our third criteria, this one gets even a little bit more confusing in that a majority of our least populous districts contain less than the majority population. So the first thing we need to do is figure out what our majority population is. So what's half our population? And then the majority would be one more than that. So the majority population in our county is 14,439. So we need to take that number and then find our 3 smallest districts, which I have them bracketed there, and make sure our 3 smallest districts have more than 14,439. And we definitely do. So criteria 2, we don't need to redistrict according to that. Criteria 3 is where, as I said, it gets a little squishy. Districts are not as equal as possible. So we have our reminder that if the world was perfect, we'd have 5,775 people in each of your districts. And we know how we vary from that. And so the question comes, do we think it's as equal as possible when you consider that these districts need to be regular, compact, and contiguous? And my answer is yes, no, maybe, I don't know.
Is there a law that says we have to?
So you only have to redistrict if you meet one of these criteria. And so this is the only criteria that we potentially would say we would need to redistrict under.
What if we didn't do anything?
Right, you don't have to do anything as long as you feel you can defend that our districts are as equal as possible.
So then my next question is, if we do something, what is the impact out to the townships and stuff?
Yes.
What changes? As far as,
there's a lot.
yeah, so does that create a lot of work?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
So when we look at this, as I said, I can spend probably hours, days, weeks coming up with, well, if we move this district here, we'd get this, and then we'd have to move this one here. And you start to, but then you always have to remember the criteria of, we want them proportionate, we want them regular, they have to be contiguous, they need to be compact. And then you also at the bottom left-hand corner there have this other thing of some of these decisions may require commissioners who were just elected in 2020 to have to rerun in 2022. So that's what I'm going to hit on now is, in reality, the fact that a commissioner who was just elected in 2020 may have to run again in 2022 because of redistricting. It's not supposed to be a factor, but in talking to auditors across the state, it always ends up to be a factor. And so it's something to keep in the back of our minds as we work through the process. People need to rerun in cases of, well, if the normal 4-year seat is up. So districts 1, 2, and 5 in 2022, your normal term is up anyway. So we knew that you were rerunning. However, the next bullet point, the district changes more than the 5% rule. So our two districts that were elected in 2020 are districts 3 and 4. And so 3 and 4 are what would get affected by that 5% rule. And now the 5% rule. So it's literally just 5% of that average population. So 5% of that population is 288. So if the districts change by more than 288, then it would require, if the specific district, so if District 3 changes by more than 288, but District 4 doesn't, then it would be just District 3 having to rerun in 2022. And it's not just that you're looking at how much was added to the district, you're looking at how much was removed and added to the district. So it's a little bit multiplying. I can't find a way to stay under that 288 is really what it comes down to with any sort of change. My little, yeah.
Now you lost me, because I look at the sheet. District 1 gained 418.
Yep.
And District 4 lost 366.
Right, and so that's just based on what the census did. The 288 is based on changes that we're making.
Oh.
So if we make changes that affect more than 288 people within the districts, that's what causes the redistricting or re-election. Yeah.
And to get that 288, if there's a district that a jurisdiction is taken out of 300 and a district is moved in with 150, that's really 450.
Right.
Not the net of those two.
Right. Yes. So really, I can't find any scenario that we do that if we redistrict, we don't end up at least with 4 of you rerunning in 2022.
Now, would that, like, if you're normal, so the 2 that it wasn't their normal election cycle, then they would have to rerun again in 2 years again, right?
Correct.
Okay, so
Do
it
they
doesn't
run
throw
for a
that up.
2-year term then?
Correct. In 2022, they have a 2-year term and then they are back on their regular election cycle. My little note down there, which I would hope that we wouldn't end up doing this, but if a commissioner ends up getting shifted out of their district, so for example, if we moved Hinckley Township over to District 2 and Terry no longer.
Or Mission Creek.
Yeah, that's one of the options. But I'm gonna pick on Josh later. So if the commissioner ends up getting moved out of their district, they do get to continue serving as long as they continue living in the county and they're not impacted by one of the top 2 things. So again, I don't think we're gonna end up in that situation. I have an option that moves Josh outside of his district, and then he'd be in District 3 and that seat wouldn't be open, and so it'd be messy. So I can't imagine that we'd ever do that. So just kind of listing through options, like I said, I can spend days moving numbers here and there. So I tried to find just some options to throw out there to you. You can look at I have a map, which I meant to bring today, that shows every single township and their population. And so you can sit there and draw lines and for hours and days, maybe if you can't sleep, and come up with different options. These are just my options that I threw together as something to think about. So option 1 is obviously, we don't actually redistrict. We leave everything the same.
Is that a possibility?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So things to consider with this option is that District 1 has a very large population compared to the other districts. It's very hard to do anything with that because it's literally like each of the townships or cities in that district have a large population. So it's very difficult to address that without upsetting the whole apple cart.
So when they used to have
Yeah.
the City of Pine City split, was that a county board decision or a City of Pine City decision?
That would have been a county board.
Right.
Yeah, the county board decided to put it out as whole city as one county commissioner.
Is this how Sturgeon Lake ended out?
It did not. So Sturgeon Lake ended up with 2 precincts because of the state legislative districts. That House district, literally, the one's 11A and one's 11B.
When are we gonna hear on that? Any idea?
February 15th, 2022.
Okay, if there's anything that you need any of us to
Right.
do, let us know, because we'll support having that put back into one.
Yes, apparently it's a lot trickier than what we thought because that part of the city is in a different census district.
Mhm.
And so that's really what, or census block. And so that's really what spurred it because it's in the same census block as Windermere Township and not as the rest of the city. But I'm hopeful now that it's on the radar, we can get it put back together.
I recall 10 years ago having some of this conversation, and one of my thoughts at that time is, the people that live in District 1 are underrepresented by 800. I mean, they get less representation per population. And not to pick on Matt, but Matt represents 1,400 people that can't vote. And yet they get counted in the number. And we can't change that.
Correct.
Apparently, so I think what I've witnessed in the last 10 years is that we all represent everybody, and we've done a pretty good job of that. And I think we can be proud of that. So
I think of elections, when the city of Pine City was split, just the election, you go to vote and it's like, which commissioner district are you in?
Right.
I don't know.
Then you have 2 different ballots.
It
And then you
was-
get the wrong ballot
Yeah.
because they don't know where the,
it was
it was bad.
Right.
I say,
and then the first, I don't know when that changed, but people are still living that. Well, I'm on the west side of town.
Yeah,
Well, it doesn't matter.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So with this option as well, we're always thinking, is it as regular, compact and contiguous as it can be? The next 2 bullets are just maybe my soapbox and it doesn't bother anyone else, but it bothers me. Finlayson City and Finlayson Township are not in the same commissioner district. And so that it's strange to me, and same with Bruno City and Bruno Township, they're not in the same commissioner district. And so those are 2 things that in my mind, if we were gonna do anything, that would make sense to address. And then the other thing that I also like to think about is like townships. So Arna and Wilma Township, for example, they're very rural, they're very far out there. Their land types, are very similar, their issues are very similar. So it's important in my mind to keep those like townships together.
like New Dozy.
Right, which New Dozy is in a different district than Arna and Wilma.
Mhm.
Yeah, they're mine.
But you've also got Park and Nickerson, which are way out there too.
Yep.
I know.
So my second option literally addresses my soapbox of Finlayson Township and Finlayson City and Bruno City and Bruno Township having different commissioners. So, but when I did that, then I have the problem of District 5 ends up with too many, or District 4 ends up with too many people. So then you end up having to make yet another change, and that Norman Township then needs to go over to District 4. Or District 5, because it's 4 currently. So when you think you're gonna address one little thing, then you create yourself more of a problem, in that.
Would that make us both have to rerun again then too?
Well, you were gonna have to rerun anyways, but yes, it would have to make JJ rerun, because his change was more than 288. Or 277, now I don't remember the number. 288, I think. So all in all, when you do this, I mean, this was the most minimal change I could come up with. District 4 ends up better in that it's closer to that average. District 5 gets worse in that it's less close to the average. But yet it helps District 4 because District 4 was very disproportionate previously, and it brings them a little bit closer anyways.
The thing is 1,000 of my numbers are in prison,
Correct.
so they're not voters anyway.
So that's option 2, my slightest change that I could find. Option 3, we're gonna do option 2, plus we're gonna move all these other things with an attempt to make even things better yet. And so here was an option of trying to just move some things around to make townships a little bit closer, or districts a little bit closer. So in this option, you end up with 2 through 5, I'll get better. We didn't touch District 1, so they're still sitting at 418 over. And in my mind, it makes the map a lot more irregular when you do this. And in a couple slides from now, I have the map to show. And this also essentially makes it so that Josh is no longer a commissioner. And in this option, then all 5 commissioners are running in 2022. So here's my maps to think about that regular, compact, contiguous with the different options. So option 1, obviously the very first map of what it currently is. Option 2, doing that slight change of Bruno City and Norman going over to District 5, and then Clemenson Township going over to District 4. And then option 3 was making all of those changes, which option 3, once you put it on a map, that seems like a really bad idea because again, when you get into that southern part, you're not very regular at all. You got the little thumb up there of munch, and so it gets ugly. So, yeah, and I mean, there's many, many more options that even after I put this together, then I thought, oh, if I move this one there, and then you end up with a bigger mess of, oh, that one's not. I tried all sorts of options to make Steve's district smaller, but then things get really messy. Without, as you mentioned, just splitting like those big jurisdictions in half, which is for elections standpoint, not helpful. So I guess the question is, where do we go from here? So my very bottom box there, our formal process can't begin until after the state and the cities and townships are done. So that's going to be March or April. But before then, we probably need to have a plan because March and April come really fast and go really fast. So some suggestions are public input, city and township input. Like with my slight change option of Norman, Bruno, and Clemenson Township being affected, I thought, I wonder what those cities and townships would think of that. And maybe they wouldn't have a, maybe they would think it'd be just fine, or maybe they'd have an opinion on it. Or maybe we have a city or township out there that feels strongly that they should be in whatever commissioner district. And it would be interesting to hear why and what their thoughts are. Obviously, commissioner input, you guys are the final deciders. So your input is very important. Some counties and cities and things are putting together redistricting committees. So that could be a committee of just 2 commissioners. It could be a committee with more people than that, with cities and townships or just general public on it. It's kind of what you'd want it to be. But really, that's kind of the point we're at, is how do we want to move forward? Do we want to just put this away till March and April? Or do we want to try to do something before then? And again, we can't, it's a little bit hard because we don't know what the state's going to do with our state legislative districts. And so that could be a bearing of what your districts look like.
And we'll know that in February.
Right, but I think we can do some legwork before then. Josh and Steve are calculating. I have spreadsheets to do that.
I like option 1.
I'm just scheming over here.
So that would change.
I would just change this end.
It sounds like you're trying to split something up, Steve.
Flip Rock Creek for Shangwatana.
He's.
I've
taken
tried
this
that. It
input-
doesn't, then you have to move more into, you have to move some out of District 2 and some back into District 1, and it gets really messy.
We're just gonna switch commissioner districts. So how about that?
We'll just move.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I just
Josh has a
moved.
nice new house, I
Yeah.
hear.
Yeah.
I don't know, it looks like the more you, I think we
The
ran
more
into
you
that
play
last
with it,
time,
the
more
messier
you-
it gets.
The more
Is-
you move. I just think it's, we get a chance every 10 years. And it behooves us to take a good look at it,
Uh-huh.
other than to just say, let her buck. You know, because just because we can, I think we should take a good look at it.
So,
Just Kelly, just to recap then, the legal standard that they're dealing with is the districts have to be as equal as possible.
and regular, compact and
Right.
contiguous.
Right, okay.
Yep.
So, yeah, there's no one's gonna tell you, yes, this is as equal as possible and as
Right.
compact and contiguous, right? So that really is a judgment on your part. When you look at the numbers, the pluses and the minuses, right? District 1 is the big district by 418 people, and District 4 is the smallest district by 366 people. So it seems, at least in my mind, if you're going to address the equal as possible, you have to start with one of those. That everything else doesn't matter because you're not impacting the extremes, which is where you'd want to be.
If they were next to each other,
Yeah.
it'd be helpful.
Yeah.
So-
It'd be a little easier.
So no conclusion there, right? But I'm just thinking that's a perspective. The other thing that I think I heard Kelly saying today is if you want other input, that's good to know before April, right? If you
Yes.
want other, whether it's general public input, whether it's specific input from cities or townships, that would be a decision that you could make sometime this fall, that there could be some public engagement.
I think if we're talking about moving townships at all into different districts, we really should get their input.
Yeah. And it sounds like it's some minor changes with some smaller cities and townships. And we should have a communication with them.
Because in my mind, I feel like Bruno City and Bruno Township should be together, but maybe they're fine with it.
Yeah.
Was such a big hangup on the head count, so to speak. His example of a prison.
Huh.
That many people, first of all, they can't even vote, right? Correct. They don't use any of the goods or services outside of what's provided to them federally.
Yeah,
So-
so that's why I say it.
Yeah, so if you just
A
base
number
it
for
on,
me is really moot.
if you base it on a head count alone,
Uh-huh.
you got this guy here sitting with a situation that's wow.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? They don't, granted, you don't get the calls that the road's too bumpy.
No, they don't get any phone calls from the prison saying I plow my road.
Right, yeah, they left a snow pile, you know what I mean? I don't-
Yeah.
I'm just still thinking,
Mhm.
trying to process, but just that alone.
I
Makes me think.
agree, JJ, and that's why I brought it up 10 years ago, because if it was easy to change, that seems to be to make, still gotta be within the 10% of average, but you would make that district the smallest district, your smallest number of head counts, to stay within the.
Yeah, well, what I think what it
Makes
does,
sense.
it makes us all more equal. Except District 1, right? And you're not gonna do anything with District 1, because that's just what it is.
Well, I mean, you could,
You-
it's like everything else. At some point, you take an eraser and you just put numbers up there.
You don't want to cut a city in half by the river and say,
Yeah.
you're voting there. You know,
But-
that's just.
I mean, you see what you can do.
Mhm.
I think if you take the prison 800, whatever it is, out of my thing, we're pretty equal. As except for one, and then one, we're not gonna change in my mind. Why would you change District 1?
Mhm.
That's what I'm at.
Yeah, if you change District 1, you're gonna be splitting something again, and that just creates a nightmare.
Now, is the prison is that the same township you live in?
What's that?
Is the prison in the same township you live in?
Yes,
So I was thinking,
I can
'cause
see the lights. at
Four.
night in the sky.
4 is
I
light.
can sometimes too.
I slid that over. Just to make the numbers look better, but then Matt's out of his,
But then that's not contiguous.
isn't it? I thought they were.
No,
Oh, they're not. Oh, maybe I was
Which
looking
one
at
did
a
you say?
map that
yeah.
had already been changed. Oh, okay, yeah.
Well, if you did option 2, then you could move Sandstone Township, but then Sandstone City has to go with, and then you're,
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
then you have way too many people.
Well, definitely if option 3 is the best way to go by everyone.
No,
Don't look at it because I live there. So,
I like option 1 the best.
Trend line says in 10 years, they'll have to change it.
potentially, but yet we see so much. There's just so much development going in places that development wasn't going before. And I mean, like up in District 4, for example, you've got all of these people moving to their lake places now. And so I think that you're gonna see that population go up. And even the New Dosies and the Wilmas and the Arnas, people are heading out.
And once we get broadband fixed,
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's gonna be even more.
Well, I'm not hearing anybody jumping up and down saying we have to do this.
No.
I think it's a good conversation. I think we can mull it over. If somebody has some ideas, we'll bring her back up in a month or so. And see
sounds good.
what people think. Good thing to think about on the deer stand. Thanks, Kelly.
Yeah.
We'll move on to commissioner updates. Mille Lacs ban canceled, soil and water.
Soil and water, I zoomed in. One public comment was only from me. I have some beavers tearing up my property pretty bad. And since then, the neighbors came over and have the same problem on their side of the pond. New biologist starting November 1st, which would have been what, yesterday? Chris Oja. The supervisor per diems were raised to $125. The drill is stored out at Skip Thompson's residence. It's insured. It's a good place to store it. Everything else seemed business as usual at the soil and water.
All right,
I'll add 2 if I can, Mr. Chair. I got a copy of the draft minutes also.
okay.
Is there a draft? If there's anything that anybody wants to see, looks pretty much the same.
Arrowhead,
Okay, I'm gonna start with the mundane and move to the big one, okay?
okay.
On the legislative report, I brought up with Ongaro about the streamlining the SSIS paperwork. And he said, well, we brought it up before, and he said, it's like, it's not getting, but he says, it's always kind of there. But I said, well, let's keep pushing on it. PILT's still on the table. And then there was a pretty good discussion again on the adult mental health initiative, and it got pushed back to 2025. But the DHS is still gonna try to capture those dollars in 2023. So we have one more year of the catchment dollars we get for mental health. And then they don't know what they're gonna do in the So they're still arguing over the methodology of how they're gonna spend the money and this and that compared to what we're doing now, and they're not producing any. So that's kind of in limbo. Then the big Rob Eklund, the representative from up there in Cooch, he was there virtually, and he spoke about the chronic wasting disease and he authored that bill. He was a co-author, I think, or maybe he authored and picked up on the moving the control of from the Board of Animal Health to the DNR, so they can cite and they have more, legal authority there. Right now, it's kind of a combination cooperative agreement thing, which they're kind of making it work, but they're kind of fighting because they do stuff without telling the other group and this and that because they don't get along that good historically. So that's kind of out there, but so he's still pushing to get the whole thing under DNR control. But he made a strong push reaching out to all the counties to do a resolution, putting a moratorium on deer movement because of the chronic wasting disease and no more new farms and whatever, whatever we can stack on there. And then I brought up the presentation we had from the DNR scientist to him. I said, well, even because they're talking about fencing, I said, well, we asked that scientist in our thing, do animals move that feed on deer? Do they move the CWD? And the answer is yes. So if a crow eats it or a coyote eats it, or even a mouse or a rodent that can go in and out of a fence, can actually move it outside of the fence. So I said, those are issues that have to be dealt with if you're going to do this thing scientifically. And then that picked up the conversation dramatically. Then I said, that's what I feel. And then John jumped in and Rob both about that. Scientists, the DNR is working on that. But anyway, he wants an individual from each county because it gives them more weight down there when they're pushing these bills through. That's Rob's position. So I said, I'll carry that. And then if we do decide to do a resolution, he wants it sent to the House Environmental Committee. I think was the thing there. And let's see. Then the list of our priorities. And did we pick our priorities and get them in at AMC? I know, but we didn't do the Arrowhead like we typically did. And I asked for her to email them down after this meeting. And she said to me in an email back that she'll talk to John and see where what the list was they're coming up with, but I never got copied. So
We usually get.
and I don't know the deadline on that, but I know we always have input.
We have not.
No, and we've always done that. So I think part of that might be my fault because I was virtual, with it. And but she's really good. So I don't know what happened there. That's pretty much it, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
But I think that CWD is a big deal for us.
We'll get it on a working agenda. Figure out what we're gonna do. Rush Line Task Force.
That's me. I zoomed in on that one. Took a while to get the quorum met, eventually did. I guess I learned that it's the purple line. It's called from St. Cloud to White Bear Lake. And there's a lot of talk of the name and maybe changing the name. It's an 80-mile line. They're continuing to evaluate that whole thing. There's talk of maybe getting Pine City with bus service.
How serious are they? Sorry to jump in. Do they really care about us up here? I was on
can't
that
answer
committee.
that. I don't know.
You were on that committee?
I was,
Yeah.
and it's always about their corridor this way.
Yeah,
What
it's
is that from our city?
The rush line.
yeah.
Rush Line.
Okay.
There was a lot of talk because just like I said, it's 80-mile line.
I think
it does seem
that's
down
been,
there,
that
St. Cloud
talk has
to
been for
White Bear.
10 years.
Yeah.
Since I've been here almost.
Yeah, so then there's talk of maybe getting a bus service up here, but I mean, the bus is one thing, rail line's another.
Yeah.
How far does the bus service?
Then there's of course environmental analysis that is in a 3-year stage right now, and I couldn't pick up if that was how far we are in that environmental stage, but that's it. Again, I requested some minutes. I didn't see them come through yet, or I didn't find them. So
It's really, really focused on the metro though, isn't it?
yeah, it is. That's what it is.
I know, JJ, that I get lobbied by a few people that drive down to Columbus or someplace to get on the bus, and
They use that
They
park
would-
and
they
ride
would-
thing there.
the
yeah.
further north it can get, the better. They would love it.
Mhm.
They work in downtown Minneapolis, and you can
Right.
catch a bus and then transfer or whatever.
Yeah, my-
Anyway, we do have people that would be affected. Thanks.
Mhm.
Snake River,
Cancel both of them.
all right. Lower St. Croix Policy Committee, there are some projects going on. They're actually working on one, right? There's a contractor right now around Rock Lake doing some fencing, and another contractor doing some berms and tile. The new way they stop an erosion. So that's good. And that's all out of the Lower St. Croix funding stream. There continues and probably will for quite some time till we get into this for a while, but some real lack of trust by some of the watershed district members. I think they're not used to having people do stuff. To move forward, they seem miffed that somebody got some bids without somebody saying you should or whatever. But I think we'll work through that, and it'll work out in the end. East Central Regional Development.
I was out of town to Nashville. I announced at the last meeting, so I don't know.
Okay,
I got a packet from them. I came in the mail though. We could move forward with passing it around, or
I don't care. NLX was canceled. HRA,
I'll start it. And I'll let Dave finish. I'll hand it up pretty quick too. They elected officers. Which is awesome. Mary Kay Sloan is the chair. The vice chair is Trevor Gaylor. And the secretary is Henry Fisher. And then we got into the annual meeting stuff, and I'm gonna hand that part off to Dave, and he talked about the depositories and papers and all that stuff.
Yeah, so, I mean, they did the typical annual meeting stuff, which you can read, but maybe the significant things were on the financial management. We're working to move the investments locally, which I think they thought was very important, rather than have an out-of-town firm managing the money. And then they did form 3 committees: facility management, board policies, and housing and development projects. And so this is a way for the housing commissioners to start to actually get a little more engaged in the operations. And 2 of them are on the study committee, Henry Fisher and Mary Kay Sloan. And so I think that's going to be a significant, what comes out of the study commission and what the final direction is going to have a significant impact on the HRA and what the HRA does.
It was a good meeting.
Oh, yes, yeah, and those commissioners, I think are all interested and engaged and bring something to the table, so it's kind of exciting.
So there's been some big changes.
Hmm?
Been some big changes. Good.
Extension.
Extension, we have lost 4 of our 4-H directors in 4 years. So, which is not, it's not, there's something going on. So, you know, when you figure that you're the young people and the families that are trying to work with these kids to get them motivated and get them to learn these things. And then every year they get somebody new as their director. So they are bringing in 2 people from down in southern Minnesota that work with this type of issues and they have worked with kids and have worked with families. And they're going to be doing interviews of a select group of volunteers. Are they going to be with staff part of that, David? I know it's volunteers and some of the kids, I believe, and
Yeah, I don't know if they are interviewing staff or not.
okay. That's one of the things that Terry had said is that they should interview the staff that are with them all the time and that they see the things that are happening. But anyways, they're going to start doing some interview to see what changes and what changes can be made to strengthen the program and what we need to do to keep directors. So that's, I think that's a different thing than they've done in the past. I think they're really stepping out of the box and stepping up to find out what's going on in Pine County that's causing this problem and to get that fixed. The next meeting will be setting up the agenda, and then they're going to start the hiring process for the 1st of 2022. So the person that we have right now is the interim, and I can't remember her name. I haven't met her. Yeah. Yeah, I think it is Kate. She will be here at least through that hiring process. And she is very good at working with some of these issues too. So hopefully we'll be able to get some of the things resolved if they can figure out what's been going on.
EMS.
Yes. Well, we set up our budget and the EMS service and how we're gonna do it. And we got an extra 95. Oh, it was 100,000, but the MS cuts $5,000 off right away just to hand it to us. So that's good. So it kind of helps with that seatbelt issue where everybody's complying. But there's some good data that we got this time. I'll skip the grant stuff, but the opioid issues are Stearns, Wright, and Benton have had a huge uptick in overdoses with opiates. And along with that, the critical incident stress management, the committees that go out, like we kind of use them when our deputies have an exposure, there's a team that comes out. Well, that's been just super busy too, with overdoses and whatever that's happening, but there's 27 call outs so far. And it's using up a lot of resources because those are volunteer teams, but they're really needed for the groups, I think, you know, so we're trying to keep that going. Then the Dr. Mari Thomas, she talked about COVID, and this was pretty interesting. There's been 51,000 breakthrough cases in Minnesota. That means vaccinated people that have contracted COVID, and only 1.6% of those cases have can't remember how that went, the numbers, I'm sorry. But anyway, only 2,400 have ended up hospitalized, and only 0.01% was there a death, and they were always had other health issues going on and elderly. So she said that COVID or the Delta variant is going downhill and across, but there's shortages of beds that we hear about on all news. It's a lot of it's not all of it, but a lot of it's because the staff in the hospitals are burned out. Some are having the vaccine issues and some are sick. So it isn't that there's not rooms to put them in, there's just no staff to take care of them in the hospitals. So, but we're winning, the COVID's going downhill. So
50-some thousand have contracted it. Even
had breakthrough cases, but they were minor, just very, very minor.
And that's in the state or in this area or what?
Oh, she didn't break it down. It's in Minnesota.
Okay.
That was all Minnesota.
You know roughly how many have been vaccinated? Like what percent of that is vaccinated?
Those are the ones that
Those are the
were.
vaccines.
I think
No, I know, but like how
Point-
many?
See how many hadn't been?
0.076% have had to go to the hospital of that breakthroughs.
Okay.
That's really small.
0.07. Oh, okay.
0.076%. And of that, it's 0.01% that died. So there, it's kind of interesting.
Mhm.
Let's see, Alan, what else?
It's gotta be.
That's pretty much it.
I don't think that
Yeah.
much.
I was just curious.
Any other meetings to report on?
I went to a first-time home buyers that was offered through AMC, and it was very interesting. What it does is it helps first-time home owners or home buyers with their down payments and with their closing costs, which are huge. And when I put this into perspective, Jana was going to buy our house for $180,000. We went to the banker and they told her, okay, so we're going to have you buy it for $235,000 and your mom and dad are going to gift you $45,000. And we thought that she was going to get $45,000 to do her home improvements. What it was that for that $180,000, she needed to have such a big down payment. So her down payment was the $45,000. So when you put that into perspective, it costs these people that are trying to buy their first home, they don't have equity from another home to put into it. It's really hard. It's something that they can't do. So this is a program that's offered through the state. It promotes first-time homeowners access to down payments and closing costs, minimal administrative burden, dedicated funding for the county, marketing and outreach support, no deposit fee in 2022. And then you get all your information from the Minnesota Housing First Change. Getting some of the counties that do it are Mora, Bram, Cambridge, Chisago County is doing it. It just sounded, St. Louis County, Chisago County, and Isani County are the counties that I put that were near us. You need to use at least 50% of your allocated amount between January through November. But you can exceed that amount too. So there's a lot of really good things about this program, and I hope that we look more into it. I know that Leslie attended that seminar too. And she's starting to do some work. The one thing that we found is that none of our banks are within this program. You have to get your funding from a certain bank that's part of this program. But we're talking to Trevor and seeing if Northview could do it. And that Franzen is, but Franzen is listed in Bram, but I'm sure that that's probably Franzen here in Pine City too. But anyways, it was really interesting and a fun way to find out more of how we can encourage people to move to Pine County.
Thanks for going to that.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
I do want to say one more thing. I kind of want to give a shout out to our zoning and planning board. Those guys, the last 2 months have been there for 3 hours because of the stuff that's happening on Kelly, you know, this building and this and that. And there's a good group of people that are grinding through the problems there. And I don't know how we get some kind of recognition out to them, but that's a lot of work.
You know what, you sit and you
And
listen.
Caleb's doing a great job holding it all together too.
You listen to the things that are brought to them, you know, and then the things that they process and put through, and it's like, but you've got this, or they're very good.
Oh, I really think the group thinks so independently and so differently that we have a good zoning board.
Right.
They have good discussion.
Yeah.
So,
Thanks.
whatever you.
Thanks.
I'd like to add to Matt, you were talking about the opioids and that type of stuff. Jerry was reading online the other day, there was another family that was a family murder suicide, where a whole family was murdered and then a suicide, and it was in Kanabec County. But he read of 2 of them yesterday. And so I'm really excited that we're stepping up and doing more with mental health, because we have such a need right now. There's so many people out there that are really hurting. So if Becky's out there, I don't see her, but I know that she's working really hard to get things working there.
Their group just trained up 7 departments in the last month and a half or so. 5 law enforcement for the naloxone. They have to get retraining.
Right.
Yeah, 5 law enforcement groups and 2 EMS services. So they're busy in that, trying to save lives, at least on that side of it.
Crazy. It's just crazy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We got one more thing here, the appointment of Mike Gaynor to, what do we call that group?
The Development Authority Study Committee.
The Study Committee for the Development Authority.
I'll move that.
I'll second it.
Motion by Moore, seconded by Lovegren. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Check your upcoming meetings. We got plenty of them.
Mr. Chair, I would just add that next board meeting, our state senator and state representative will be in attendance at 1 o'clock for a legislative discussion. So if you have any issues that you want research or information ready for, let me know.
Thanks. Any other business? If not, we'll declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Did you go to that Friday night?
Yeah, I waited that. You were, your nose stuck up in here.